Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are talking to author Jeffrey Jackson, the author of the new book from Pilum Press, Shagduk. It's an urban fantasy taking place in 1970s Texas, and he's here to tell us all about it and anything else we happen to want to talk about. Mr. J.B. Jackson, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. How are you?
Doing good. Taking care of some outdoorsy stuff. We're filling up the garden and taking care of the deck outside now that the weather's finally more inclement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for having me on your program. This is really cool.
Oh, well, yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, it's always nice to meet new authors. It's my understanding you've been working on this book for quite some time.
Yeah, it's evolved over quite a long time. It started with piles and piles of notes and then a desire to try my hand at fiction, and using the notes as source material. I always had something that I could refer to when I didn't have any ideas. And it just all kind of gelled over time. At some point, I had a completed manuscript and I was going to publish it myself, but then I hooked up with Pilum Press and they wanted to do it. And I thought, well, by doing that, I would, I was kind of looking forward to designing my own cover and doing it my way. And that was going to be part of the hobby. But now that I've put these tasks into the hand of professionals, I've seen how my book has grown from something that was very DIY, very homemade, into something much greater, much more professional. So I'm pretty excited about that. And
yeah. It's one of the things that a lot of the people I talk to are very much in the DIY space. Like game developers or such, and tabletop people and things like that. And a lot of times you do see that point where you go a certain point, with your own resources, and then you need that outside help in order to really take it to another level. When you're developing, like, tell me a bit more about how you start getting all these notes together. What was the original impetus for that?
Well, this may be true for a lot of people, but I go about my day and I think of something interesting, a plot or a character or a phrase, or there's a word that intrigues me, and I think, oh, I got to write that word down and look it up. And so I fill up these scraps of paper. I'm surrounded with them. And then later, when I have a moment, I take all these notes and I see what I have, and I transcribe them into a document that is very well organized. I have sections for names, places, descriptions, plot ideas, just little snippets of things that I think that would be really great in a novel somehow. Turns of phrase, memories, funny jokes that I hear, someone else's story. Someone tells me, hey, this funny thing happened to me today, and I think I'm going to steal that.
That's what writers do. They just take their things experience and just stick them into books.
So most of it is, they say write what you know. So most of it is stuff that happens to me or happened to me long ago, like memories from childhood, characters I've met, things that stand out in my memory that I just think this is too good just to leave it here in my mind. I need to use this for something. And so when I read my own work, it's full of things that resonate with me personally, that would not be true of the reader. They wouldn't read something and think and know anything about it because they don't know who I am.
Yeah, they lack the context for the initial thought or idea.
Yeah, but at the same time, because these things happen to me personally, it makes the book more realistic. It's not just a figment of my imagination. Well, most of the time it's not. That being
except for all the demon summoning, hopefully.
Exactly. Those things clearly didn't happen to me.
Clearly, completely fictional. Do not try this at home, people.
But I found that using the raw material as it is often can be pretty boring, but it can provide a contrast between the protagonist's boring life. He's a librarian. He begins the story, which is written in the form of a diary.
Mm-hmm.
He literally says, what does a librarian in a small university have to write about? Nothing ever happens to me. What am I going to put in this diary? But then, of course, things do start happening to him, and the story becomes progressively fantastic. So for the more fantastical parts, much of it clearly is pure imagination, the demon episodes. But I take these scraps of paper, these little stories and notes, and I exaggerate them to make them more interesting or more exciting. I use it as raw material to turn it into something weightier.
Yeah, it's the bedrock from which everything else is, built on. And
Yeah,
since it is based in real life, it's grounded and it has that kind of texture to it.
Exactly. And, I'm pretty sure that many other writers just do the exact same thing that I'm doing, but I kind of had to discover this methodology. I had to discover it the hard way. That's why it took so long to write this book.
How long did it take you to write the novel?
Well, it's hard to say because there's the note-taking and the outlines. I consider that part of the writing process, so that adds to the years. But it's been probably about 10 years.
That's a short amount of time than some people. Some people haven't written their first novel ever.
Right. I don't have a good memory for time, so anything that takes a long time takes 10 years. I just say 10 years. But really about 10 years. I did formally study some writing. I studied a little bit with Gordon Lish, who back in the 80s was known as Captain Fiction. He was an editor for Knopf, and he had his own magazine called The Quarterly. What was that? There was another magazine I think he was the fiction editor for. But I did study a little bit with him, and I took some creative writing classes in college, but none of these things really helped me get started as a writer. So I kind of stuck to music back then. I played it.
Love the t-shirt, by the way.
Oh yeah, Rush.
Hey, I'm Canadian. It's part of our national heritage.
I know. I thought you might appreciate it.
Yeah.
But the thing about being in a band, for example, is you're collaborating with other people, and whatever your personal pure vision is gets turned into something else when other people get their hands on it, which was fine. And that can be a great thing. You can create something that you would never have thought of on your own. That's better than what you had in mind. But as I got older, I graduated college. I had a career. I didn't have time to do the band thing anymore.
That's the problem with having all those extra responsibilities come in on it. You just a lot of hobbies end up taking the red eye out of town. Yeah,
so I went back to writing as something that I could do all by myself anytime I wanted, and I didn't have to compromise with other people. And that scared me a little bit because I thought, well, this is just going to be all me. So, if it fails, then I'm
it's all on you.
Yeah, it's all on me. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, of having read an advanced copy of your book, courtesy of Pilum Press, full disclosure, I did get contacted by your publisher to take a look at it. I very much enjoyed it. I mean, I happen to like this kind of epistolary style of writing. I mean, ever since original Dracula, when I first encountered it.
Yeah.
works really well. I mean, the whole diary entry kind of going over the guy's day and certain repetition of elements, like when he goes over like the contents of meetings and stuff like that. I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as possible because the book hasn't out yet. But I did like that very much. It feels like, okay, this guy's a librarian in the 70s, but things are just gradually slow burning into weird as the thing goes on and certain events start piling on, and he makes certain decisions along the way that, okay, yeah, I can see this is going to go somewhere.
I worried a little bit about the slow pacing because it's not for everybody. Personally, I enjoy movies that are dialogue heavy. There's not a lot of action. It takes a while for the story to unfold, and the same thing's true for my taste in fiction. But at the same time, it kind of reminds me of The Hobbit. Bilbo and the other hobbits are living in Hobbiton or wherever, the Shire, and nothing ever happens there. They have an idyllic life, and it's the same thing every day, just a lot of drinking of ale,
and avoiding your in-laws,
smoking pipes, avoiding your in-laws, and then one day a wizard knocks on your door and turns it all upside down. You had to have that preamble of quotidian life to provide the starkness of the contrast between that and what was to follow. That made it for me really exciting. And of course, whenever I'm daydreaming and fantasizing, some of us think of what would happen if I went back in time, or if I went to the land of the dinosaurs, or took a spaceship to a strange planet or something, and you indulge in these fantasies. It's just, I don't know if it's just me, but I think, well, how would I brush my teeth if I went back to the land of the dinosaurs? What would I use for toilet paper? These are real problems, and we can all identify with that.
Yeah.
But you don't when you read other people's novels or you watch a movie or a television series, they don't address those things. If they do, it's just very, peppered very lightly.
Yeah, or it's a major plot point for a specific thing.
So I give a little more time to daily life because daily life interests me. When we are born, we are not given an instruction manual. We have our parents to teach us, this is how you brush your teeth. This is how you go to the bathroom. This is what you do at mealtime. We learn from our peers growing up. And then when you reach adulthood, you go to someone else's house and everything's different. It smells different. They live differently. They eat differently. You put ketchup on your steak and they look at you like you're a criminal. So we're all making it up as we go along.
Yeah.
And that fascinates me. And so
I've noticed that I'm getting married in September, and there is definitely that adaptation period when you mix your life in with somebody else's, when, okay, we do things very differently in many ways.
Oh, absolutely. Therein, I think, is one of the keys to happiness in life, is being exposed to different ideas and different ways of living, the thoughts of a different human being. It enriches your own perspective, and I think you get a lot more out of life that way when you well, here we are back. We're collaborating in a way when you marry someone and start a family. It's a collaboration.
Yeah.
It's not just you doing your own thing. When you live alone, which I have done, things can get very, very weird. And if you have any single friends and you go over to their house, and you look around and you're like, you live this way? This is so bizarre to me.
I've been that single friend.
I love that. I just think it opens your eyes to some things you might have missed out on. You're like, well, I never thought of that. I don't have those kinds of towels, or, what is that utensil you're using? This is fascinating. um, I do address these things in my book a little bit because they interest me, and I reason that if they interest me, they probably will interest a few other people.
Yeah.
And that's all I can hope for, is that when someone else reads my book, is the reason I wrote it in the first place is twofold: to indulge in my creative urges, but also just to entertain someone and to make them smile and escape from the humdrum of going to work and brushing your teeth and doing the dishes.
Yeah. Well, I'd say you did a very good job of it. Like you feel very much while reading the book, reading Shagduk, that the main character is like, going through his life, just going to work, going to band practice, just, hanging out with his friends, just having a regular life. And then this strangeness starts building up because there's a missing professor, there's some strange artifacts, there's some weird knowledge that comes creeping in through his research, and all of a sudden things start going a little bit haywire over time as he starts dealing with well, let's just say he read the wrong thing aloud. It's just to say that.
Yeah.
Speaking of the more fantastical elements, like, where did you find the concepts? Like, are they more like, come out of your own imaginations, or did you base them very much on like more historical practices and stuff like that? I know that, do a lot of references to the Doric language and, various ancient practices in your book. Where did the more fantastical elements of Shagduk come from?
Well, some of the stuff is just a figment of my imagination, but like with anyone else, it's informed by our own experiences, things that I've read and seen in the past. I grew up on a diet of those paperback fantasy novels with the yellow spines, Daw books.
Oh, yeah.
Did those. I think John Norman's Gore series had yellow spines. But then the Conan short stories were reprinted in the early 80s. There were Fritz Leiber books.
Yeah, all the classics.
Michael Moorcock, Elric. And this stuff blew me away. It changed my life, as did Dungeons and Dragons. Some of the more fantastic music that was coming out in the 70s, like by Rush. This particular album, they sang of necromancers and things like that.
Yeah, The Caress of Steel, is it not that album?
Yeah.
Nice. That's a classic one.
Possibly one of their most underrated, unknown records.
They do a lot. In terms of the concept albums that Rush come out with, that one is very much one of the more fantastical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As an aside, I've been experimenting with how to make an audiobook version of Shagduk. And in my experimentation, I would record my reading passages and I would play it back and listen to see how it sounded. And I sounded very boring and like a monotone. And it sounded a lot like the narrator in the Necromancer song on this Rush album. Which I thought was a little bit funny. I think it's the drummer Neil Peart. I think he's the one reading the.
I'd have to look it up.
The spoken word passages, but he sounds like he's just totally bored. And I'm like, well, why don't you jazz it up a little bit? This is going to be on your album.
Well, not everybody can be talented at everything. The guy could drum like nobody's business, but when it comes to speaking parts, maybe not his thing.
That's right. But at the time they recorded this album, it was something they had never attempted before. They were testing the limits of their creativity and their virtuosity, their ability to play music. And when you push yourself like that and do things for the first time, you're not going to be 100% successful at first. No. You need to get it out there and then think about it, and you can refine that. That is what I have done over the years. This Shagduk is written as a diary. Well, back in the 90s, there was an emerging zine culture whereby people who didn't even necessarily have a computer yet. You know, some of these were done on typewriter, handwritten, but people were making their own little magazines of just whatever it was that interested them. And a coworker of mine made one, and he showed it to me one day, and I'm looking through it, and I'm like, what is this? It was bizarre and fascinating. It was filled with this guy's personality and his humor and his worldview. And I'd never seen anything like it before. It's like, what do you call this? This isn't a book. It's not poetry, but it's clearly a how to put this. You've got your novels, you've got short stories, you've got diaries, you've got encyclopedias, and then you have this thing, and it's clearly its own thing, and it made perfect sense to me that it existed. It just had never existed before, or I had never heard of it before. So I'm like, well, I want to do that too. I want to make a zine. So I'm like, well, what am I going to call it? What am I going to put in this thing? What's my content going to be? I can't just copy what this guy did. I've got to make it my own. And so around the same time, I was reading a very funny, strange novel called Diary of a Nobody by George and Whedon Grossmith. They were brothers, I believe. And it took the character, forgot the guy's name.
He was nobody.
He was just this random nobody who lived in Victorian times with his family in his house, and he would wake up and be perplexed by his family, the butcher, the neighbors. Life was happening to him, and he was trying to decipher these things the best he could, but just not having an easy time of it. And so he would write about it in his diary in this really dry humor that recalled Jeeves, Bertie and Jeeves.
Oh yeah,
Woodhouse characters. And I just thought it was so funny. And I thought, well, maybe I could write about my boring life too. I exaggerated my own character to absurd proportions, and so I played this kind of is a little bit of a dandy, a refined person who goes out into the world and is just bewildered and offended by everything around him. And the joke was on me. It was on the protagonist of these diary entries. So I did that for like a dozen issues, and I would give them to my friends, and they would say, "This is really damn funny. Do more of these." I'm like, okay, because they're fun to make. So I got used to the diary format, and it made storytelling, it's like training wheels for telling a story, because it was just a day at a time.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're writing, conventional narrative fiction, you don't have those training wheels. You don't
have that additional structure. Your chapters can be however long they can be, and contain whatever the hell you want them to, versus this is what happened during this day. I'm writing it down. There we go.
Yeah, and I didn't know if I could do that, if I was capable of that. As I said before, I had studied fiction a little bit, but I just didn't know if I could do it. And so, well, I want to try it anyway. So why don't I just, if I did that diary thing again, maybe I could tell a fantasy story. I've never read a fantasy story told like that before. I mean, there's Dracula, of course, which is told more as a series of letters from the points of view of different characters.
Yeah, the diary entries and letters and newspaper clippings and reports and stuff like that.
And I thought, well, I could try and do that too. It doesn't have to just be a diary. I could have like, if he writes a letter to somebody, I could include that. Mm-hmm. So I just started writing, and let's see where this goes. So I did the initial setup. Here's this guy. I have a boring life. What am I going to write about? And just took it from there. And I really have no idea how good this book is, if other people are going to read it and get it and enjoy it, or if they're going to look at it and just say, what is this? This is not a novel. This is not, they wouldn't know what to make of it. And So it kind of amazes me when people like yourself say that you looked at it and you actually enjoyed it. It's like, that's great. That's great.
Well, I'm glad to be able to be the bearer of good news in that regard.
But I did have a little bit of confidence because back when I did those zines and I gave them to people, they clearly enjoyed them and they wanted more. So I thought, well, they liked that, but this is better, so they're going to like this even more. And I'm grateful that that is in fact the case so far. Everyone who's read it seems to be enjoying it.
Yeah. For those who want a bit of an advance on that, this book here from Pilum Press, The Wells of Ur, contains actually an excerpt of your novel. Let's see, page 51 here. So for those of you who want to get support your publisher and check out the book a little bit before it comes out, this is an opportunity for you right there. So yeah, Pilum Press has been doing pretty good. They got the new edition of Thune's Vision from Skylar Herrenstrom. They got this, Penultimate Men, now Shagduk with you. And it's my understanding that it's the beginning of like a possible trilogy of books in this particular series. What is the specific name? It was called the De Re Doridica Book 1 is the kind of subtitle for the Shagduk here.
Yeah, when I presented the manuscript to the publisher, it was about 120,000 words. And he said, this is too long. And so I thought, well, let me look through it and see if I can find a natural stopping point. And we found that together, and that brought it down to 90,000 words. No, actually, the original was over 200,000 words. So Shagduk is about 90,000. That's about the same length as The Hobbit. So we thought, okay, this is a good length for a book.
That's good. It's a nice short novel that, that's the kind of thing I could fit in my back pocket going somewhere.
So then I thought, so I have leftover material. That can be book 2. And I have already in my mind, I know of some places I want to take this. And I think maybe a trilogy is probably realistic for it, but it could be longer than that. It just is a matter of how long does it take me to tell these stories.
Yeah, because there's definitely some places to go with this. Like, after reading through this, there were definitely some points where like, okay, I want to see what he does with this plot point going forward, or where this character's journey is going to take, or if these background elements are going to become more part of the foreground, like some of the more fantastical elements that don't technically show up during the events of the book, but are referenced when other characters are discussing history and such as that. Like some of the really fantastical stuff. It actually reminded me, this not in terms of like the tone of the book, in terms of the pacing, but in terms of like the subject of this normal world, and there's this fantastical elements underlying it, but not in a horror way, more in like a general fantasy way. So yeah, I would say like in that case, it was very Abraham Merritt in many ways. If that makes any sense. Yeah,
I could see that. Now, employing some of these techniques, I consume a lot of television and books and movies, and there are these techniques where you can foreshadow, and you get used to that as a reader or a viewer. And so somebody says something or they pull something out and you're like, oh no, he's going to die. Like you can predict what's going to happen. I wanted to avoid that. So some of the things that you find in my book that feel like foreshadowing, oh, where's he going with this? I drop it. Because first of all, when somebody's writing in their diary, they're just getting it on the page.
Yeah.
They're not crafting a novel out of their life. So there's going to be a lot of red herrings. There's going to be stuff that he's writing about that he doesn't know anything else about, and maybe he never finds out.
Yeah,
about.
Or something that seems really important to him, but in terms of the overall plot is just completely unimportant.
And that being said, 100,000 words down the line, I'll remember these dropped threads and red herrings, and I could still pick them up again if I want to.
Yeah.
That's up to me. So it serves multiple functions. It's working out for me well so far. So yeah, the name De Re Nordica, I needed a title of the series that it had to make sense. That was the hardest part, was coming up with one that made sense. I didn't know where to begin, so I looked up, I Googled the 100 greatest fantasy series of all time, and I was looking at those titles, and half of them had the word dark in them, and the other half had some other word.
The saga or chronicle.
Yeah, the chronicles. I thought, oh, I'll do the chronicles of. I thought, no, that's been done so many times before. And the answer was in my book the whole time. There's a fictional work called De Re Nordica, and you'll find out what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that would be a perfect title for the series. And you wouldn't understand that at first, but after you've like read the whole trilogy, it will make sense to the reader. But it really stood out. It doesn't sound like other series titles, so I was pleased about that.
No, well, it's definitely definitely stands out from other stuff, and it's not derivative of anything else in that regard, which is always a plus. Yeah.
So when you pick up my book and you look at the title, you don't know what the title means. You don't know what the subtitle, the series title means, and it's got this drawing of a demon on it. Nothing about the book looks like other books that are on the market right now. It doesn't sound like anything else. You flip it open, it's like a diary. It's like there's nothing conventional about this book yet. The things that happen, there's other books out there about demons. So I'm not like, I haven't recreated the wheel or anything. You've heard stories about demons before. But I think it's pretty fresh, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I can't remember the last time I read a book that was exactly like this. So there's that. It's certainly, definitely, as you say, not conventional. And that, automatically gives it, some interest right over there.
Now, my influences, a sharp-eyed reader will pick up on some of them immediately, and some of them they won't. But some of the seasoning that went into this is as diverse as the movie Spinal Tap, the television series The Office, the aforementioned book Diary of a Nobody, which was a Victorian humorous novel. These aren't ingredients that you typically would find in a fantasy book like Robert E. Howard's Conan books.
Mm-hmm.
He had his own influences, of course, writers that preceded him that he admired, the research that he did about world history. Because my book takes place in 1977, there are certain details that I had to get right, and it involves a great deal of Googling, looking at old newspapers. So I want to tie it into the events of the day.
Yeah.
And I want to be true to the place he's in. He's in the city of Fort Worth, which is where I'm from. So I revisit places I remember from my childhood. It's kind of an homage to a city that I love and has probably been underrepresented in fiction. Logan's Run might be the best example of a fictional story that takes place in Fort Worth.
I didn't realize that.
There's a new television series, 1883, that's pretty popular right now. There's some Fort Worth scenes in that.
Well, that's kind of cool.
And certain cities get all the love. Like, who wants to read another book that takes place in New York? That's been covered.
I think it mostly comes down to the fact that those cities offer some pretty good tax breaks for people who want to make movies there.
Yeah, but I really perk up when a story takes place in a place that I haven't heard of before. What was it? Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. It takes place in Albuquerque. And I was like, hey, they're really filming this in Albuquerque. That's fantastic. You can see the mountains. They're standing on a parking garage downtown Albuquerque. I thought that was just great. And they're starting to do more of that. I realize that when I talk about writing, I often conflate that with film and television as well. I realize these are all different things and there are different techniques employed to create them, but I do get I am influenced by these things. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's very much, we are the product of all our influences. And, if everybody was influenced by the exact same things, well, there would still be some differences, but I think our fiction diets would be very, very much more bland if we
Mhm.
didn't all have different things that we were drawing from.
And there's a certain anxiety that comes from utilizing our influences in our creative works. I didn't want to, rip off the people that influenced me. So I was concerned about that. And I was concerned about, well, what part of this is me and what part of this is Diary of a Nobody and Spinal Tap in The Office and um, Conan the Barbarian and so forth. Um, but I find that all creative people do heavily rip off each other. That is something that's always happened. Some people get away with it because they make it their own.
And other people do not.
Led Zeppelin's a fantastic example of that, where they just took some old blues songs and electrified them, and they became Led Zeppelin songs. And
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah, it's just one of those things. It's something that you have to have. You can have, the building blocks come from other sources, but you need that talent of your own in order to make it work and gel together.
yeah, and those influences and references, people will catch on to those, and it can be something that's appreciated by the reader. They're like, "Oh, I know what he did there. That's a nod to Merritt, or that's a nod to Michael Moorcock." You just don't want to plagiarize.
Oh yeah, definitely not.
Um,
Lord knows people have been plagiarizing Michael Moorcock way too much. I mean, how
yeah,
much did Games Workshop manage to get out of him?
right.
Oof. Yeah, don't get me started on that. Uh, well, anyway, I very much like to thank you for coming along. Is there any place that people can reach you or contact you for your work?
I'm on Goodreads, on Twitter. You can contact me through Pilum Press. June 15th is the pub date for Shagduk, and it's also the pub date for Sky Hernstrom's new edition of Thune's Vision, which I'm
Nice.
very, very excited to read.
Me too. I'm looking forward to it.
The other writers associated with Pilum, those that appeared in the Wells of Ur anthology and the Penultimate Men, those writers are all very much worth checking out, and I'm excited to be in a circle with these people where we're talking to each other and bouncing ideas and learning and growing together. It's kind of like a salon of sorts.
Yeah, that's a great way of getting, the juices flowing among all these different authors. All right, sorry, technical issues. As where were we?
We were almost done.
Almost.
I saw a little timer at the top, and so let this then be our proper ending to the program.
Indeed, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Jackson.
It's been a pleasure as well. Again, I really appreciate you having me on your program.
Hey, good authors deserve sharing. What can I say? And plus, it gives me an opportunity to talk to interesting people, so I got no problem with that.
Well, it's really nice to meet you.
There is one question, though, I must ask. You are a librarian by trade, at the very least. That is the impression I got from your book. Do you ever work in a library that had this kind of strange vault full of weird books somewhere?
Yes. Yep.
Nice.
In several different places. It's a really rich. It really stirs your imagination.
I can imagine.
Like that, and you're like, oh boy, what am I going to find in here?
Yeah, well, you never know.
I know.
Yeah. And for those who want to know more, well, you're just going to have to pick up Shagduk once it comes out. Can you repeat the time?
June 15th for Shagduk and June 15th for Sky Hernstrom's Thune's Vision as well.
You heard here, people. Don't miss them. So I've been Zero Sum Bastard Pilum. This has been JB Jackson, author of Shagduk, and I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Have a good day.